Hey, I'm Hannah. I've worked in classrooms for over 7 years. Now I help others pass their certification exams at 240, and today I'm going to help you. This video is going to prepare you for the Praxis Teaching Reading Elementary Exam, or the 5205. Now, Praxis has a few different teaching reading tests, but this video is targeted to what you need for the 5205 exam. And this video is going to cover 3 things: what's on the test and how to study for it, the most likely concepts that will be on the test, and we're going to look at a few practice questions. Now, the Praxis 5205 exam consists of 6 content categories: phonological and phonemic awareness, including emergent literacy, phonics and decoding, vocabulary and fluency, comprehension of literary and informational text, writing, and assessment and instructional decision-making. The first 5 categories pretty much align with how children progress through the stages of learning to read, so we'll go over them in order. They each consist of multiple choice questions, with the vocabulary and fluency and comprehension categories having slightly more questions than the others. The last category consists of 3 constructed response questions, or CRQs. These are few response questions that ask you to apply your knowledge of teaching reading from categories 1 through 5 to specific scenarios. This category counts for 25% of your total score, so you definitely want to make sure to keep watching so you get our tips for how to answer the CRQs. Let's get started with the first category: phonological and phonemic awareness, including emergent literacy. That's several big ideas bundled into one category, not to mention a mouthful. Basically, this is where our youngest students build the foundation for learning to read. Let's take a look at what you need to know. We need to build children's language skills, both receptive and expressive. Receptive language is a child's ability to understand what they hear, and expressive language is a child's ability to convey a message to others. Both need to be nurtured by teachers, parents, and other caregivers. This includes doing things like reading and retelling stories, reciting nursery rhymes, and modeling correct speech. Basically, encourage kids to do something they love to do. Talk, and talk some more. As students develop their oral language, it's important to show them how printed words and spoken language are related. As teachers, we have to model using print features. You'll need to be familiar with strategies to do this, such as reading from oversized books, pointing to the words as you read, and labeling items in the classroom. One of the most important things to know is that phonological awareness is not exactly the same as phonemic awareness. Phonemic awareness is essentially a subcategory of phonological awareness. Phonological awareness encompasses the ability to recognize individual phonemes, syllables, and words. Phonemic awareness is the ability to hear and use individual units of sounds, or phonemes. You'll probably be asked about some strategies you can use to teach phonological and phonemic awareness skills. Need some ideas? 240 study guides give you plenty. Link in the description. The study guide has a great list of strategies, but there's one that I really love that I have to tell you about. Here it is: Elkonin boxes. Or you may have heard them be called sound boxes. You can use them for lots of things. For phonemic awareness, they can be used for isolating and segmenting phonemes. As students say a word, they move a token into a box for each sound they hear. Want to know a trick I used to use to help my students count syllables? Have them put their hand under their chin, say a word, and count how many times their jaw drops. Okay, watch. How many syllables are in the word pass? Pass. 1 jaw drop, 1 syllable. How many syllables in the word certification? Certification. 5 syllables. As in, you will pass your certification exam. Try this trick right now. You'll look silly, but I promise it works. Okay, now we've got the foundation. Let's see what students are ready to learn next. The second category is phonics and decoding. This is when we get into the nitty-gritty of how exactly to teach kids to read words on their own. There's a lot to know, but I'm going to help you tackle it. Phonics is all about connecting the sounds of language, phonemes, to their written symbols, graphemes. In addition to teaching your students single-letter consonant and vowel sounds, you'll need to be familiar with more advanced phonics patterns. Here are some key patterns to know in order of increasing complexity with examples: consonant blends, consonant digraphs, silent E, vowel digraphs, and diphthongs. I know, funny name, right? But they're important to know. Diphthongs are unique vowel sounds. For example, in coin, the O and the I come together to make a sound unlike short or long O or I. Man, that's a lot to learn, but don't worry, we have plenty of practice for you in our study guide. And be sure to review R-controlled vowels and inflectional endings. You'll likely see a few questions about syllabication. Students move from reading monosyllabic or one-syllable words to multisyllabic words. You'll need to be able to identify types of syllables and how to help students tackle them. Take our example from earlier. Certification. Look at the different types of syllables it has. Sir is R-controlled because the R changes the way the vowel is pronounced. Tif is a closed syllable because it has a short vowel sound and ends in a consonant. Ik is closed too. A is open because it's a single vowel with a long vowel sound. And shun is a final stable syllable because it has an unexpected pronunciation. But it's always the same, and it comes at the end of a word. Need more help with all this stuff? Check out our study guides. We've got more explanations, videos, and quizzes to make sure you're covered. You can find the link to the Praxis study guide in our description. That was a lot of information, but see, we made it. On to the next category. And don't forget to keep watching because we're saving the biggest category until the end. The next category we'll look at is vocabulary and fluency. Let's start with vocabulary. In order for students to progress as readers, it's important that they understand the meaning of the words they're reading. Lots of vocabulary is learned indirectly, but you'll need to teach some words directly, especially those that are academic in nature. You'll need to know some methods for teaching new vocabulary. A great example is the Freyer model, which has 4 boxes that organize the information about the word. The key is actively engaging students with the word, not just having them copy a definition. You'll also need to be aware of how to teach your students to figure out the meaning of an unknown word they come across while reading. The most common method you'll see will be morphemic analysis, which also might be called structural analysis or just word analysis. Morphemic analysis refers to the process of breaking words into meaningful parts, or morphemes, to determine what those parts mean, and putting them back together to determine the meaning of the whole word. For example, you might get a question that asks you to identify a word on which morphemic analysis would work. Let's make it a fun one. On which one could you use morphemic or structural analysis? Pizza, pepperoni, reheat, tomorrow. The answer is reheat, because you can break the word into the prefix re and the root heat to understand that it means you can warm up yesterday's pizza again for breakfast. Okay, let's go over the other part of this category, fluency. The biggest thing to know is that fluency is made up of 3 components: accuracy, prosody, and speed. And you'll need to know some strategies for supporting fluent reading. The right methods will depend on which component of fluency a student is struggling with. But in general, it's important to make sure they're reading at their current level and that they have lots of opportunities to read out loud. You can even let students record their reading and listen to themselves. So, we just went over some of the most important aspects of vocabulary and fluency. And remember, we'll go over some practice questions at the end. Now it's time for Category 4. Comprehension of literary and informational text. Here, students move from learning to read to reading to learn. You need to know the difference between literal, inferential, and evaluative comprehension. And you'll need to be able to recognize which strategies or types of questioning are best to develop each kind of comprehension. To build literal comprehension, work on things like summarizing and identifying plot elements like setting. For inferential comprehension, help students recognize cause and effect relationships and make predictions. To develop evaluative comprehension, model metacognition and help students make opinions about the text. I loved using graphic organizers for comprehension. You'll probably see a couple on your exam. Any type of text we read in my class, there's a graphic organizer for that. You'll probably see a couple of questions about informational text or nonfiction text. In questions about this genre, correct answers often involve text features, including the table of contents, headings, charts, graphs, diagrams, and the glossary or index. Teaching students how to preview and use these features will help them comprehend informational texts. And that's the whole point of reading them, right? We could go over comprehension for hours, but let's move on. And don't worry, we'll revisit this with a practice question about comprehension at the end. The fifth category is writing. You might be wondering why there's a writing section when it's not one of the essential components of reading instruction. You're right, but it's on the exam because reading and writing are very closely related. The writing category is made up of questions about written expression and spelling and grammar. The most important thing to know falls under written expression, so let's dive into that. You'll need to know the steps or stages of the writing process and how to teach them. The stages of the writing process are pre-writing, drafting, revising, editing, and publishing. Teachers should provide direct instruction for each phase of the writing process. You should be familiar with these methods. Modeling. Students benefit from seeing you work through each stage. Guided writing. Similar to guided reading, you provide specific writing instruction and feedback in a small group. And conferencing, either with the teacher or a peer. Like I said, you may see a couple of questions about teaching spelling and grammar. It's a good idea to review the stages of spelling development and how to support students in each stage. If you need to brush up on that, use the 240 study guide. We made it to the last category. I'm proud of us. Look at us go. The final category is assessment and instructional decision-making. Remember, this is the one with the constructed response questions, or CRQs, that you'll write out your answers to. And it's worth 25% of your total score. I know, free response questions can be daunting, but trust me, you already know everything you need to from the first 5 categories. This is just a chance for you to show off what you know using an imaginary scenario. You'll have 3 questions. They'll involve supporting literacy learners within one of the areas we've gone over, such as phonics or fluency, or supporting diverse learners, such as English learners or students with disabilities. Each constructed response question gives you a scenario, a teaching situation to read and consider, and lists certain tasks, issues you write about. The best way to understand what this will look like is to see an example. So here's one from our study guide. Okay, here's the scenario. Pause this video and take a moment to read. Okay, so it's 5th grade, working on vocabulary and an informational text. And we've got a small group of students with IEPs. Here are our tasks. Identify and explain one strategy the teacher could use to teach unfamiliar vocabulary words to the entire class. And identify 2 strategies or supports Ms. Johnson can utilize to assist a student with a learning disability in completing this assignment. Explain the benefit of each strategy. I recommend writing 1 or 2 paragraphs for each task. Be concise and get right to the point because you'll only have a few minutes for each one. Task 1 asked us to come up with a strategy to teach unfamiliar words to the whole class. There's not only one right answer. There are several strategies you could pick. Here's an example of a strong response. We can build background knowledge using pictures and video clips. See how I used specific examples? Task 2 asked us to give 2 strategies to help the students with learning disabilities and explain the benefit of each. Here's a great sample response. First, we can reduce the number of words these students will need to put in their graphic organizer. Second, we could use highlighting to help them focus on context clues and summarizing. Note how we included a sentence or 2 about the benefit of each strategy. We've got lots more sample CRQs like this in our Praxis Teaching Reading study guide, including sample high and low responses for you to review and compare. Let's do some questions. 5 syllables. Now that we've gone over some of the big concepts in our 6 categories and practice answering a question from category 6, let's look at some practice multiple choice questions from areas 1 through 5 to show you how those concepts can appear on the test. If you want a lot of practice questions, you can click the free practice test below. At the end, you'll get a score to see how well you did. Now on to questions. 5 syllables. Remember for category 1, I told you about phonological awareness? Let's look at how that can be reflected in a question. A pre-K teacher has children participate in the following activities: clapping syllables in students' names, counting syllables and days of the week, standing up if their names contain a specific number of syllables. These types of activities help students to A. Develop phonological awareness by focusing on repeated specific letter sounds and names. B. Develop phonological awareness by using meaningful words. C. Develop letter sound correspondence by breaking words into phonemes. Or D. Develop phoneme-grapheme relationships by pointing out how names are made of letters and sounds. Okay, those activities all involve hearing sounds, no written letters. So these two are out. They definitely promote phonological awareness, but is the focus on repeated letter sounds or meaningful words? The question feedback we give in our study guide could tell me that this activity does not focus on teaching specific letter sounds repeatedly. Some names may start with the same letters, but the goal of using student names is to create significance for learning by using a word of importance for the child. So, this is the correct answer. Using words that are significant to children, such as names, creates meaning and interest in the lesson. Now, let's look at a question under Category 2, Phonics and Decoding. A first-grade teacher builds upon the phonics foundations already established in kindergarten. Since students progress at different rates, instruction will need to be differentiated to meet individual student needs. Based on the progression of decoding skills, which of the following groups of words will be taught last? Toy, pout, clown, shop, chunk, ding, hat, gap, knot, hate, pull, while. Whichever one is the most complex or difficult should be taught last. Let's see. Toy, pout, clown. Those have vowel digraphs and diphthongs. Shop, chunk, ding, consonant blends and digraphs. Hat, gap, knot are CBC words, simple to decode. Hate, pull, while. Those have silent E. This one is definitely going to be taught last. Vowel digraphs and diphthongs are the most complex monosyllabic decoding stage prior to beginning multi-syllable words. What about those vocabulary and fluency questions? What do those look like? When choosing vocabulary words for his 5th grade students, a teacher has been purposely selecting academic and high-frequency words. He already has various strategies and routine activities in place to facilitate the use of and interaction with high-frequency words. He is now focused on expanding his students' experiences with the academic vocabulary specifically. Which of the following would best support this goal? Completing word searches that include the new academic vocabulary, requiring students to use the new academic vocabulary outside of school a certain number of times, deliberately using the new academic vocabulary terms in questions and activities outside of reading instruction. This is the correct answer. Reinforcing these terms across different content areas will expose them to the words in a new setting and increase the likelihood that they remember the words, their meaning, and how to use them in a sentence. And what about those questions about comprehension? What do those look like? A 4th grade teacher is planning a lesson to help facilitate student use of metacognitive skills to require students to self-monitor while they are reading a text. Which of the following activities would she use in this lesson? After reading, draw a picture of one of the characters from the story. Pair students and require them to stop at multiple pre-selected locations in the reading of a text to perform think-alouds. Provide a short quiz at the end of the story that will be graded together. Ask them to read the story a second time aloud to their neighbor. This is the correct answer. The think aloud activity will require students to stop periodically to think about what they are reading. This is a metacognitive skill. Now for the last remaining category, writing. A 3rd grade class is beginning the writing process for a persuasive unit. Which of the following lesson topics would be most applicable for the pre-writing stage of the writing process? Determining audience, transition sentences, punctuation of compound sentences, or sensory language? This is the correct answer. This is an important part of the pre-writing stage because it can influence how an argument is framed and which evidence is most impactful. Now that's just a tiny sliver of practice questions to give you an idea about how these concepts are assessed on the test. There's still plenty more to learn. Did you know that thousands of teachers have passed their certification tests using our study guides? If you really want to make sure you're prepared for the Praxis 5025 exam, take the next step and subscribe to the 240 study guide. It is hours of videos, so you can watch or listen while doing chores. It's test aligned with hundreds of practice questions, so you know precisely what you need to study. And it has the money back guarantee. So click the link below right now to get started.